Thank you. I now call this meeting of the Committee of the Whole to order at 5:33 p.m. Please call the roll.
Mr. Rollins?
Here.
Mr. Scrivano?
Here.
Mrs. McCulloch? Mr. Siegel?
Here.
Mr. Connor?
Here.
Ms. Stanford?
Here.
With 5 present, 1 absent, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Before we go any further, I'd like to thank Rod and Connor, always helping us out, working behind the scenes to produce the board's broadcast on Channel 20 and other formats. And I want to remind the board and everyone here to keep social distance, wear your mask over your mouth and nose, speak into the microphone, closely to the microphone so we can all hear you. And also to remind you that please hold your questions until after the presentations are finished. So our first agenda item is the meeting minutes of November 2nd. Are there any changes, corrections, or additions to those minutes? If not, I'll take a consensus to approve those minutes. Okay. Before we move on to performance monitoring, I am going to jump the agenda to item 6C, which is the employee engagement survey, so that we don't delay Dr. Blaylock. And so first of all, let's see if Dr. Blaylock is on. I saw him earlier.
Yes, good evening. You caught me by surprise there a little bit. Thank you for moving me up in the agenda. I greatly appreciate it.
Because we can be long-winded at times, I'm going to move you to the front of the agenda since you're our only outside speaker tonight. So I will turn it over to Mr. Siegel, who chairs the Internal and External Stakeholders Committee, and give an introduction and have a conversation about the Employee Engagement Survey Report.
Thank you, and thank you for being here, Dr. Blaylock. Appreciate it. The district's 4th Employee Engagement Survey window opened up on Wednesday, October 14th, and closed on Wednesday, October 28th. As with past years, and consistent with a board-approved contract, we partner with K-12 Insight to administer, analyze, and help report the findings of the survey. The survey measures engagement by asking for feedback in areas including leadership, mission, and vision, career growth, employee recognition, and work environment. Now I'm going to turn this over to the accountability team and Dr. Blaylock for a report on our employee engagement survey.
Thank you very much, members of the board. Dr. Jarrett, it's always a pleasure to be here to meet with you and to review this data with you. I greatly appreciate, especially you guys moving me to the top of the agenda. I was pleasantly surprised by that, so thank you very much. So the question is can you see my screen now? Are you able to see my screen? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Were you able to see my screen?
Yep. Yes. Jude, since
Okay.
you just joined, I wanted to let you know that I've rearranged the agenda so that Dr. Blaylock can go first since he's our only outside speaker. So we have jumped down to item 6C, the Employee Engagement Survey.
I heard all that. I was there at the beginning. I just,
Thank you,
for some
Jim.
reason, it's
Okay.
not working. Thank you, though.
Okay. Jude, since you just joined, I want to...
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we are still here.
All right, fantastic. Okay, thank you. Again, like I said, I greatly appreciate you moving me to the top of the agenda. I'm here to report on the 4th Annual Employee Engagement Survey. kind of go over some of the nuts and bolts of it. We talk about engagement being the connection that individuals feel with their profession and their current jobs in particular. Our survey this year was open from October 14th through 28th. And our goals here are to measure levels of engagement of Rockford employees, classify them as highly engaged, or less engaged, and identify areas where employee engagement can be improved. So we sent email invitations with unique survey links to employees on October 14th, and then we sent out reminders on October 20th, 22nd, and 27th. So basically, we use this report to break it down, the results, and we compare it to the previous 3 years of administration. One thing I will note for this particular year is we did move to a slightly more current version of the survey. Previously, we've been, working with a combination of our 1.0, 2.0 version of the survey, and this year we moved to a 3.0. So there's a lot of content that carries over, but just you may see questions that don't have trend data to them or anything along those lines. That's the reason why, is because it's the 3.0 version of the survey. So when we look at participation, our participation has steadily gone up over the course of the time that we've administered the survey. We actually had a 67% response rate this year, which has been our highest yet. Typically with a school district, we're looking to go for a threshold of 50%. When we look at the response rate by role, we actually see a pretty steady jump with the paraprofessionals this year compared to last year, and a slight one with the certified staff as well as central office staff went up 19 percentage points. And basically, this is a straight response rate of these particular position types. When we look at overall engagement, what we see here is we see a slight decline in engagement from last year to this year. So you've stayed pretty steady at about that 77%. This year you're down to about 76%, which is, sampling area, you have a larger sample size, so you have the potential for a little bit of sample bias there that brings that down. But given the current educational environment right now, I would say, not losing a lot of ground is probably a very positive thing right now, given how people are feeling within school district right now. When we look at the engagement drivers, I'm going to move through these fairly quickly to get to some of the other pieces of the report as well. We'll see a little bit of a decline around familiarity with mission and vision, as well as the direction that the district is moving. It's very contemporary that you see, people are a lot less centralized right now. There's a lot more up in the air. So it would make sense then that people have a hard time connecting with the overall direction the district should be moving in, just because there's so much flux and change going on. When we look at district leadership, we saw district leaders take a pretty substantial decline this year. Particularly when it comes to encouraging ideas to share, encourage employees to share ideas to improve performance. We also will say that 1 in 4 actually had a neutral on that. But, again, speaking to the really difficult changing scenario, things are probably changing faster than information can be gathered, and I'm sure that everyone has a lot of thoughts about how to make things go better, but just the very chaotic environment that is going on right now may make that very challenging. When it goes to school and department leadership, we do see some increases here. And I've stood before this board before and spoken about, what we see both on these survey data as well as what we see in the literature, where people tend to, love the school, hate the district. So people, it's a distal proximal concept where the closer they feel to something, the more they are to like it. So they're with their principal, they feel good about their principal, and then there's the them of higher, that the further the leadership goes, that receives less support. When we look at feedback and recognition, a little bit of a decline here as well. Again, everyone's working harder than usual, and they want more recognition and feedback for it. But It's a little bit of a difficult thing to do at this point. When we look at work environment, one of the things that really stands out to me on this is that you have a 13 percentage point increase in employees saying that they have the materials they do need to do their job. So one of the things that we've seen in a lot of the surveys we've done since the beginning of the pandemic is educators talking about not having the resources they need to be able to perform their jobs. You're still only at 2 out of 3, but the fact that you went to 2 out of 3 from roughly 1 out of 2 previously, given the situation, definitely shows a lot of improvement in this particular area. Another thing that we'll talk about here is that the districts encourages continued education and professional growth. Across the board on some of these, that and the training I've received from my district, my work has helped me perform my job more effectively. Definitely see some good 5-6 percentage point increases on these, which speaks to how well you're preparing folks for the changing environment. People are feeling, that they are being more prepared than they were previously to be able to perform their duties. So one of the questions we ask is whether or not their principal or direct supervisor shared the results of the previous survey. In this case, 68%, or roughly 7 out of 10, indicated that was the case. And only 6% really said, no, that did not happen. When we look at the trend over time, see a little bit of a decline compared to last year, but still fairly consistently up from where we were 2 years ago. The next question is, has your principal or direct supervisor made changes to improve employee engagement since 2019? 51% of participants indicated yes, with 40% saying they don't know. Given that the short school year that you had last year because of the pandemic, again, I would interpret this as a fairly positive thought. And then again, a little bit of a decline compared to last year, but still up quite a bit from 2 years ago. So it looks like your building and school leaders are using the data more and using it to drive change. So the next piece we'll talk about are the focus areas inside of the drivers for employee engagement. So I'll walk through our formula for how we generate this again really quickly, and then we can go into the actual pieces themselves. So what we do is we take all of the questions, with the exception of those first 9, which are considered the engagement questions, the rest are considered driver questions. And we take an average score of each one and then put them in a distribution. So you've got a low and an end, a high and a medium. We then take each of those items and we correlate it to individuals' engagement scores. And we have that as a distribution. So then we have a low, a high, and a median. So what we see here is that the items that are in this upper left-hand quadrant are the items that are below the median in average score, but above the median in correlation to engagement. So these are the things that are having a negative impact on engagement. Conversely, what we see down here in the green is that these are the ones that are above the median in average score and above the median in correlation to engagement. So these are the things that are going really well, that are making a positive contribution to engagement. So these are the things that you really want to focus on fixing, and these are the things that you really want to make sure that you keep doing. So when we take a look at these scores here, one thing to keep in mind is that this is a self-contained data set, meaning that there's always going to be a high and there's always going to be a low. And the midpoint that any score can have is 3.5. So that's the middle of the scale, basically. So what we see here is we do see a fair number of district leadership and some of these mission and vision pieces popping up back again on the ways to improve employee engagement slides again. So, the understanding of professional needs, explaining key reasons behind key decisions, consistency, transparency, those are the kinds of things that we have. This right here is a new item. District leaders promote a positive work culture. We got a lot of feedback about the morale question, and so we had actually adapted it to become this one right here. When we look at the positive things, what we see here is the things that are having a positive impact. So again, 3.5 is that midpoint of the scale itself. So when you're getting into 4, that's definitely solid agreement. So a lot of that has to do with the interactions with the school department, school or department leadership that folks are having, but also people feeling that they are prepared to meet the requirements and expectations of their job. So no matter how much grumbling is going on about, we don't know what to do, people are definitely feeling fairly good about that overall. The other ones these are just very similar, but they don't have as strong an influence on engagement. We then get into engagement by demographics. And so what we see here is the engagement by years of service. And what's been interesting about these data going the past couple years is that we've typically seen this inverted boomerang where people get less and less engaged and start to bounce back. What's been interesting is that 2 years ago, the 16 to 20 was your lowest area. Last year was 21 to 25 years, and then now it's more than 25 years. So the more tenured your staff are becoming over time, the less engaged they are feeling. When we take a look at it with engagement by role, your building administrators and surprisingly enough, your paras have the highest level of engagement compared to the other groups as well, with the classroom teachers as the demographic that has the lowest amount of engagement. When we compare these over time, we see kind of a steady downward trend with the classroom teachers, as well as a little bit of a stark decline with the building administrators, and a decline here with the bus drivers and those sorts of folks. Certified staff were sort of flatlined. Central office administrators were on a steady decline, but then took a pretty big drop this year. We now get into the Net Promoter Score perspectives of this. We asked this question of both for school personnel, we asked them for this about the school, and for all personnel, we ask it about the district. So what we see here is two things, is that for this year, the Net Promoter Score at the school level almost more than doubled. So it went from 14 last year to 28 this year, or 30 this year. The other thing that's interesting about the 2 years is that last year, the range was -5 or -95 to +86, meaning that the school with the lowest Net Promoter Score was a -95, and the highest was a +86. This year, we actually see that low has jumped to -29. So we've seen a really big increase in what that low is, as well as a slight increase in what that high is as well. When we look at the district Net Promoter Score, we also see a little bit of a slight climb there from -20 to -27 to -25. So we are seeing that steady increase over time, albeit slowly, but it is slowly coming up as the years go on. So the other thing I'll share is that we also ask staff members to share one word that it describes their employee experience. And so this is a word cloud of each of those words, with the larger words having the more, more responses associated with them. So we see as the biggest ones is challenge, overwhelmed, and frustrated. But we also see sitting in there a little bit is engaged and proud and fulfilled, satisfied. So it's not all, negative news when we take a look at these. The final thing that we have here are some additional questions that we ask of classroom teachers and certified staff. And what we've actually seen over the years is some fairly steadily increases over time, which we kind of see with some of these here. We see a little bit of a pullback with some of these just because I think of what's going on in school right now. But for the most part, we see either stability or a little bit of an increase more than anything else. What I thought was interesting is you have this 9 percentage point increase with that my PLC as a valuable use of time compared to last year. Given the hybrid and remote instruction that may be going on within the district, that is kind of interesting that people are finding value in that PLC interaction. And then with the additional topics, we see that increase in proud to work at the school. as well as a few of the other topics as well. So finally, I've got my key insights here. I'm just going to leave these up here for you to read for a moment. I've covered a lot of these different topics, but as you take a look at these, I'll go ahead and open up the floor for questions.
Okay, board member comments or questions? I will just share one comment. Jude and I sit on the district leadership team, and the comment about the value of PLCs being higher than it's ever been before, that's a message that we've heard at that meeting from principals and teachers that are on that district leadership team. That this year has really, because of all the craziness and being overwhelmed or whatever, that they're seeing a lot of value in their PLC. So that's not surprising to me. So share that. Mr. Siegel.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Blakelock. I appreciate the presentation. I'm very encouraged by some of the changes in the results of this year's survey over previous years. I think in spite of the difficulty, we've had some really neat responses that show some more favorable outlooks on the district. Each year I've, in reviewing this, I've made the comment that you made about the responses being so different from the building and compared to the district, where teachers seem to say things are going great in my building, but man, district-wide, it's a slog. But this has happened enough now, over 4 years. I'm hoping it'll begin to dawn on people that things that are happening that are good in their building are happening in other buildings across the district, that perhaps their outlook is diminished somewhat by the fact that they're not in those other buildings, but perhaps they could look to their fellow teachers and trust their words when they say that good things are happening in their buildings too. I feel like the service that they extend to their principals and to their co-workers within that building clearly appear to be replicated in other buildings. It would just be nice to see that reflected in these surveys. I'm hopeful that will come soon. Thanks.
Mr. Siegel, if I may, and I shared an anecdote about this with Dr. Jarrett when we were first reviewing these results, which I'll keep to myself for now. But the one thing to consider is taking a look at challenging the principals to serve as a liaison between their school and district leadership as the go-between to kind of help build that bridge or that connective tissue between school personnel and district personnel, and have them sort of own that that energy, that positive energy going into the district as part of their responsibilities to help bridge that gap between the two entities.
Mr. Khan.
Hey, a couple things. On the key insights page, the third paragraph, it's interesting you use the word perceived disconnect. The way the results look, I'm not so sure the word perceived is the right word for there. One of the questions is, you have 3 bullets there. Are they within the range, for lack of a better term? So they're all in the mid to low 30s. Is that really typical for a district of our size, that kind of relationship of the numbers?
So let me address the first comment first, and then I'll come back to the second one.
Sure.
The reason I've used the word perceived is because it is survey data. So these are based on individuals' perceptions. That's really why I use the word opposed to clearly stating that there was a disconnect, because I'm reporting on the perceptions of individuals. What I would say in terms of the other ones, across the country, those do tend to be the lower performing ones when it comes to specific district issues that personnel are having with the district. Is 32% on the lower side of that? Yes, it is. It's typically, we'll see it in like the low 40s on average, I would say. So they tend to be the lowest ones, and this is on the lower side of that, but it is not, egregiously lower than what we typically see.
One of the questions that I wonder at this point is, it had said it's slightly down, is, sort of correlations across the board. And, and I think I've asked this one before, and remind me, do you have the concept of small focus groups on some of this, or does it end at the numbers?
Meaning within your district or in general?
Within the district.
I do not have any data that speaks to focus group information based on these numbers.
Yeah.
Mr. Connor, the way we've worked that in the past is Earl Dotson Jr. and I have typically taken the information and picked 3 general questions to focus our conversation around these survey data. We've been doing it for 7 years now. With the pandemic, we have not been doing it this year, but that is always our practice. We also ask our building level administrators to do similar work with their school to create an area of focus, and we ask our department chairs to do that as well at the district office. So that is what we do is we take the quantitative data and then drive more qualitative conversations based on that, and then report back with any changes. We had some really nice gains that we had been making based on that strategy, and then obviously it got cut considerably short last year with March being the end of the faculty meetings, and then this year it was not a good idea for us to assemble large groups. We thought it would probably send a mixed message. So we will certainly go back to that or a similar practice, but we do take this quantitative information as a starting off point to drive those very important focus group conversations.
Yeah, I think if you look at the first bullet point, and you've all heard me rant and rave about not using bullets, it always makes it tough, but bullet 3, sub-bullet 1, I think that's the one that, of all of them, kind of, maybe in one way doesn't surprise me, although, and I understand the pandemic and the rest, but the understanding of the professional needs, I think, is something that, that would be one I'd really want to know more specifics, and I think that especially since it's either flat or a decrease, however, you want to look at it, and it's below, sort of at a high level where other districts are at, which would make sense. Bottom third, really. I do think that there's a number of things the district is doing to address that, and let me just comment that I think some of the technology, some of the facilities, some of the training, certainly the comments from district leadership, council, and so forth are good, and those have been positive indicators. It just seems like there's a gap between what classroom teachers in particular say, I really need this, because it was reflected in other parts of the numbers about classroom teachers. So it would seem to me that that would be an area where, given that it's the number of teachers have continually said over the years it's been fairly low, relatively speaking, about having the resources they need. You know, what jumps out for me is really, you know, what is it that people think is missing? And somebody just said it a minute ago. I think this is a role for a principal, definitely. I mean, not trying to shift it or anything, because, you know, district is a part of this, but I would think that having a feel for what people really think is missing is something that, you know, on the corporate side of life, you do all the time, because you know that there are differences up and down the chain, and that the messages don't necessarily get back and forth, and particularly for what people need. So, and that one is tough. I will say, my one comment is, in my career, this was something that we got hammered on continuously. So I'm very sympathetic to it, but I have to say that it is something that's been very consistent. So that's why I'm sort of drilling on this particular one.
Any other comments from board members? Not. Thank you again for being here and presenting tonight, and good data for us to work on improvement. So thank you for being willing to jump to the front of the line, Dr. Blaylock.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me this evening.
Okay. All right, so Jude, I would like to go back to performance monitoring, which is your committee under number 4 on our agenda. So Jude, you can have the floor.
Okay, the first item on there is board policy 480. And basically, these two board policies that we're going to look at, 480 and 490, are just new language to reflect what is already being done. The operations and accounting and audit one is allows us to request that we extend the deadline for the audit to November 15th, because the state says we have to have it in by code by the 15th. And I guess every year we ask for November 15th instead of the October, and so this just says that we can do that even though we've been doing that. That makes sense. It also recognizes when revenues are received, the fact that we recognize the taxes when we actually receive them in 2 payments, and whereas any sort of grants, we recognize as soon as we meet the requirements for those grants. And the third part was that the revolving funds, which were eliminated when InTouch software was implemented, and the policy doesn't reflect that either. The operations activity fund, again, I think it was 4 years ago. I know it was 4 years ago that procedures were changed, but the policy was not updated. So both of those come back for the December 8th meeting for a vote. Unless there's any questions on that, I'll move on to Wilson Aspire. Okay, hearing none.
Mr. Rollins has a question.
So I'm assuming that change on the grants and similar items, have we always done it that way, or is this a recommendation? Oh, that's right, Ms. Yara isn't even here. Is there somebody here to answer this question? Did our auditors recommend this change?
Can I have you come up and use the mic? Thank you. You can introduce yourself too.
I'm Jamie Murray, Executive Director of Finance, and yes, we have been doing that.
Microphone on. Is the red light on your microphone on?
It's on, yes.
Oh, I see it now. Okay. I'm just too short.
Okay. Well, that was my question. There's a typo in that
I saw
sentence.
that, too.
So that just needs to be cleaned up too.
Okay.
The requirement, is that the typo? Okay, I caught that too.
Okay, thank you. All right, Jude.
Okay, next on our agenda is Wilson Aspire. I actually laugh. I took a stroll through memory lane because the movement of this program to Wilson kind of coincided or happened right before I got on the board. initially we had the severe profound students, SPED students, out at Page Park. And when we were moving the students from Skyview, Skyview, which is down in New Milford, was housing some of our most difficult behavioral students, and we were going to revamp that program and rename it. And I'm just sharing this because I thought it was of interest, and you'll hear names again. We were revamping it and changing it to Fresh Start and moving it to Page Park. And so to do that, we moved our students from Page Park to Wilson, which at the time it was it also housed the freshman campus for Auburn High School. Prior to that, it had been a STEAM school. But when we moved our students to Page Park, from Page Park to Wilson Aspire, let me think, was the regional didn't come in right away. But eventually then we moved our Auburn students back to Auburn, and the Kennedy students, which were up on Rockton, came down, and it became Kennedy for the traditional students and Wilson Aspire for the other students. And I think it's kind of interesting. Wilson Aspire has, let me find it, a pretty long moniker. I talked to the person who was principal at the time, and she and some of the others came up with this name. Aspire actually stands for Achieving Success, Providing Inspiration, Reaching Everyone. So it was our most severe students who moved there. At the time, there were 41 students who moved. I was told that there were actually 55 at one point, but right now we have 27 students there. A couple things have happened in the last few years to make the district bring forward this recommendation, one of which is the increased number of therapeutic day schools in the area. And those schools are appropriate for handling many of our students. In addition to which, if we house the students, or if the students go to a day program, a therapeutic day school, the state reimburses us at a much higher rate. It's about 50% of what we pay. I asked if you have a chance to look at your attachments. There is an attachment that shows all the schools. You probably have seen similar before when we vote on the contracts, but it shows all the schools that our students are attending for therapeutic day schools. And there are actually 3 schools that we get. It looks kind of like this. There are 3 schools that we get 100% reimbursement, and that is because of private state grants, meaning we were informed that this is where the students will go. So we have more therapeutic day schools. We also have a much higher percentage of our students who are being put in their least restrictive environment, meaning back into their home or their zone schools. Thirdly, we have a program that started about 4 years ago. Interestingly enough, it is currently housed up at Page Park, and it's called Transitions. For those of you who aren't aware, special education students are allowed to stay in the district until they reach the age of 22. On their 22nd birthday, they move on. So even if they graduate at 18 from high school or have all what they need, we have this like 3-year gap. And for some closer to 4, but what our transition program does is allow them an opportunity to have some real world experience. And if you've been in any of the stores, we actually take students out into the stores as part of a program with paraprofessionals there to oversee their and I actually think it's teachers who are there. Jennifer Lawrence is on, and she can correct me if I'm wrong, but who oversee their work in the store. There's some suggestion of having them work in different areas in the administration building. I had a whole list that I was sent of the print shop, Aramark, mailroom, welcome center, looking for opportunity, nutrition services, opportunities for real world experiences, so they're not just continuing along with what they've been doing in the high school special ed classes all those years. So we currently have 27 students, as I said, out at Wilson Aspire. Of those, this transitions program of which I speak, 16 of them would be able to just transition into that, into transitions. We have 7 other students who are completing their graduation requirements. And so some of those will go to zone schools, some will go to onto their, for example, the middle school students onto their high school. And then we have 3 students, even though Page Park was meant to be for middle and high school, we have 3 elementary students, 5th graders there. And they will be moving on to middle schools, all 3 to Lewis Lemon self-contained programs. And this is in your executive summary, and it was a chart looking like this with the multicolors. Boy, I can't turn this around. So the placement for these students will be determined by their IEP team. I mean, we'll go forward with their IEP teams to make sure that they're all appropriate, and that would happen after the board takes action on this recommendation. From a fiscal perspective, I had them include on your handouts or the school district, or the state report card, which refers to the amount of money that we spend per pupil at different schools. And my understanding is one of the reasons this was brought forward to us is that the column which indicates the per pupil spending for Wilson Aspire was and currently is $82,000 per pupil. And that would include indirect costs as well as direct costs, as determined by the state on the state report card. But when you look at the savings that we will incur by closing the program, it's like $1.91 million. And that includes staff as well as, and when I say staff, one of the reasons it's an expensive program is we have 27 students, but we have a principal and we have a secretary and we have all the teachers as well as the para and anything else that we need for support services in the building, all those supplies. And that 1.91 million is the savings that we'll recognize, which when you look at it and you divide that by the 27 students, it's about $40,000 a student that we would save. And they would still be being served and their IEPs being met. And in some ways, they'll be in better place than had they been at Aspire, because we do not have full-time resources with psychologists and therapists and behavioral experts, because we have what we need to meet the IEP. So if a student has so many minutes a week on their IEP for an occupational therapist, for example, and there's so many students that need that, that's how often that therapist is in the building. They're not there full-time, whereas we have greater coverage in some of the other schools. So the recommendation, it'll come to the board for a vote on December 8th, is to close that building. One thing I'd like to mention, 2 things. Transitional program, which is at Page Park, has to move out of Page Park this year. And so there's conversation about where would be best suited for these students who are no longer really students in the district, but they are our students, but they're not like high school students. And so it's been discussed that it would be more positive that they weren't relocated yet in another school building. One of the suggestions that we had conversation about, and I don't remember if it was ever brought to the board, I know that it was written up, and that was to have them in the lowest level, I hate to use the word basement though, of the administration building, there is space down there. We're looking for a lot of alternative occupational activities within the administration building. The problem is that the upgrades to make that space accessible for that use are about $1 million, as if we don't have as many other fiscal issues. But it's still something that I would love for the board to have a conversation about, whether or not we'd be able to or willing to expend the resources to make that space appropriate for those students. I will tell you that the students who are going to, I said there were 7, I think, but the students that are going to the high schools are in our academies, and they work with other students in the academies. There were some examples of which they did some work with robotics, like when there was competition, supporting that, and then afterwards the being able to work some of the robotics. They have students in our educational pathways who are coming in and working with students, and there are buddy programs. So there's a lot of ways that the district is really trying to, the old word was mainstream, but least restrictive environment for our students. So are there any questions about that myriad of information? I think the most interesting thing I found was when we had Page Park and they had a playground, the largest contributor to building that playground was Bob Dylan, like musical Bob Dylan.
Oh, really?
So there's a piece of trivia for you.
Okay. Mr. Connor, go ahead.
Yeah, on the cost savings, I don't think we have to do it tonight, but some of them intuitively I get, but I really, are these true, if you will, cost savings? Because if you have the teachers and so forth, you know, there'd be an implication to me as the students get placed in other places. It seems unlikely that we'd have everything they need right now, and that some of those folks that are at Wilson Aspire or a portion of what they're doing would have to be replicated. And there's a number of these. I mean, I won't knit through every line item, but I think it would be helpful to see what the true net savings are, just for comparison.
Mrs. Lawrence, I think, is on there. Do you want to respond to that?
Right. We had this conversation, so Jennifer should be able to speak to that.
Good evening. This is Jennifer Lawrence, Executive Director of Special Education. Our teachers at Wilson Aspire have the same training as our teachers in our zone schools, in our PLUS programming, as well as in our STAR autism programming. So they receive training in our ULS curriculum, that's our alternative curriculum, and they also receive our STAR autism training. So there's nothing more we would need to provide for the teachers to move back to our zone schools. They receive the same training, and they also have the same licensure as the teachers in our zone schools.
But the question really, Jennifer, is since these students will still be in our system, and will still be providing support, and those teachers will still be teaching. And by the way, part of this is when we vote on what's going to happen starting January 21st or whatever, I believe it is, that the generalists are going to sit down, the HR people, to try to help. There are positions throughout the different district for special education, but all of our classrooms where we'll be sending students, it's not like we have to have a whole teacher move with a student because our classrooms aren't all full. So that'll be part of the move. So if you can explain why it really is a cost savings, and not just because of the way that we're repositioning the staff.
Sure. So there are open positions across our entire district that would absorb all of these teachers. And when we looked at each student and where they would potentially be placed, there were open seats in each one of those classrooms where we would not need to increase another classroom to then increase another teacher and then another paraprofessional.
So,
Do you still need it broken down, Michael, then, for the next meeting?
yeah, I think I understand the concept. So if I'm hearing correctly, we already had an ability to accommodate one or two more students at those facilities. And then I was looking, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the list on some of these. I mean, clearly the big ticket item are the people. Yeah, I think it would be helpful just, again, you don't have to do every line item, but I think because it's such a large number, you know, not knowing it as well as you all do, I think for me, I will just say, I'm used to having cost savings presented, and I'm not picking on the district, but talking at the corporate level in general, is that normally there's some charting that says, you know, 7 students are going to go over here, there are seats available, and there's no more, say, para help that's needed, etc. That would at least give a comfort level that we're not just like cutting it off and calling it savings, that we have something that will accommodate every student. I know if I were a parent of those students, that would be a question I'd have, is that we're showing it as cost savings, and if there really is the ability to accommodate it, that's fine, but just something that would indicate how.
Any other comments?
Can I comment, Michael, that to say that this is way more than cost savings in terms of meeting the needs of our students in the best way, least, you know, restrictive environment, the transition program, providing more vocational connection for our students, and the other students being able to join with their peers in the regular school environment, and where they are unable to do so, being placed in self-contained classrooms at Lewis Lemon, I think was the one, but I think that we need to, the money has probably made us start, you know, gave us some direction, but I think it's really important to note that the most important thing is that our students' needs are being met in the best way possible.
I understand that this isn't all money. It was just such a large amount that's why I brought that up. I think the other part is, I basically, just speaking as somebody without the background, have to kind of take it on faith that it is the best option for these students. Because I'd have to ask, was it just the driver, it seems to me, was the fact that the number of students is almost in half, or roughly. And so it seems like if our goal was educationally to have the best environment, that might have been something we talked about before, but it seems like the driver is the number of kids. So I'm not disputing what you're saying. I'm just saying that overall, I do think that for a vote that we need to present to the public so they understand, because I do believe, I have faith that we are doing the best for our students, but I think you have to draw a line between A and B on this one, I think.
Okay.
Anyone else have questions? All right. The next item on ours is just a report. It is not a, there's nothing to be voted on. It is an update on the early childhood grants that we receive. The total on this one that for our early childhood program, and that includes our visiting for the the pre-preschoolers is $16,857,864, $4 million of which is local monies. The report itself speaks to the fact that the goals that were set the previous year were to serve the funded enrollment and well, let me just say, for the implementation, it did meet all the goals that were set forth, the 4 goals that were set forth the previous years. It implemented all the required components outlined on the ISBE compliance checklist for grant programs. It maintained blue ribbon quality endorsement, and as for 2019-20 as the teacher's annual performance report. The preschool 2018-19 preschool expansion grant met 98% of the items on their compliance checklist. They maintained a great grant-funded enrollment, enrolling proper populations. Now, the populations have actually increased for this school year. Previously, the students eligible for this grant had to be living at or below 50% of the federal poverty level. They were students with special education eligibility, but not speech or language special ed eligibility. Students identified as youth in care or foster youth. Students experiencing homelessness. And for next year, or actually this year, 2021, they added the following populations: English language learners, students whose parents speak a language other than English, children whose family have been impacted by COVID-19, and screening that indicates delays in development. So the prenatal home visiting program last year served 266 students. The preschool program served 2,687 students. And they chose one item on their list of targets to look at across the board, and that was the self-regulation target. 81% of the 4-year-old students did meet that self-regulation target. And if you have a chance to look at the attachment on this on your board docs for this item, there is a bar graph that actually disaggregates the students who met self-regulation targets. And at the high end is 97% of the at-risk eligible students met the target. And at the low end were those with only 50% meeting were those at or below 100% of the federal poverty level. So there were some challenges this year or last year getting the program going, because if you remember our ransomware attack and the down of our tech, they depend a lot on that for getting the year going, finding students, setting things up. And then at the end of the year, they depend on face-to-face contact through sources in town, resources, looking at preschoolers for the next year, looking at the younger children, trying to bring them into the preschool program. And of course, we didn't have any face-to-face contact, which made enrolling students for this year's program down. And in fact, enrollment in every early childhood program is down locally and statewide. ISB expects us to work toward full enrollment, but they're not reducing our funding even if enrollment is not met. The preschool program is working with community partners to increase enrollment as best they can. Some ways that they worked around our situation, some of the online tooling that they used, they did verbal questionnaires. The early childhood, where they do the home visiting program, they did porch visits that lasted 15 minutes or less. And their course of action, or what their recommendation is, that they continue to implement the early childhood grant-funded programs. Those experiences and family engagement and connections to resources provide the necessary support to close the gap for children experiencing risk factors prior to entering kindergarten. The program, the only goal that was reported was on the self-regulation target, and it did have a positive impact on the development of student self-regulation skills. I asked for some information. I know for a couple of years we have been asking this question. Can you show us that our students who have gone through our preschool program are doing better than our students who did not go through the program? And I was told it's an owner's task because our technology does not allow us to disaggregate that information at this point in time. And so if you'd like Kim to speak to that, I'm sure she's here, but I do know that question comes up every year. I was also told that with regard to transportation, our transportation funds, 80% or about 20% usually come from local sources, but they do their best to try to use grant funding for more when possible. And I was told that the state is not going to reduce our money for next year just because we're not able to use everything this year. Some of the things that they've used money for, the iPads for all the students, for example, additional professional development, additional resources for parents. They did kits to send home with all the students. And the state allows us to continue to use this year's money through July and August of next year. It doesn't end with the fiscal year, so there will be some expenditures there. But we will not be penalized for requesting the same amount of money for not having used everything. Oh, and the state will, typically the state allows July and August, and they're going to allow it to go for the full year out. If I have that right, Kim. So in other words, we're not going to be behind, and we'll have extra monies to spend next year when we're in full action. Looking for a piece, Kim sent me a note on the numbers in all the programs, comparing last year to this year, and where we're at, and obviously our numbers are way down. But I'm not finding that email because I seem to have misplaced it. But we're only at 1,000. Kim, are you there? Do you want to just speak to those numbers? Or all right. Otherwise, I can pull up the email that you sent me this afternoon.
I have it, Jude. So
perfect.
In regards, Jude had asked how we were doing enrollment-wise compared to the previous 3 years. And so for our enrollment this year, we have, as of December 1st, we have 1,606 students enrolled. Of those, 612 students are fully remote, and 994 are in person. That is when we're not in the adaptive pause. Just for comparison, last year, our preschool program served 2,971. Our capacity is really around 2,700. The fluctuation in those additional numbers happens when some students drop and we add other students in, so we always look at total served, but our funded enrollment would be there. So we are behind in our enrollment. The home visiting program, this year, as of December 1st, we have 150 children enrolled under the age of 3. Last year, our total served was 261. So we're running much behind. But we are not unusual. As a matter of fact, compared to some programs in the state, we are higher and we have a higher percentage enrolled than other programs. So I think that answered your question, right?
Thanks. And go ahead and speak to that, how difficult it is to bring forward information about how effective this is when we look at students as they progress through our system.
Yeah, so that is actually included in the PDSA as something we want to do next year. So when looking at providing the Board of Education with the outcomes for our program, we now have a system in place. We've got some dedicated staff in our process and continuous enrollment department. We have some data systems, and what we want to do now is to really focus in on creating the business rules of how we want to look at that. So when you look at early childhood, are we looking at students that were enrolled 1 year, 2 years, 5 years? And we're really going to be looking to the board for some additional clarity on that. We would like to, we would like to get with our teams and propose these research-based questions and then bring them forward to the board again to make sure that we are answering the questions that you need answered. It's, early childhood programs, typically when you look at research for early childhood, it's really on the quality and how it impacts outcomes overall, and we always are using national data for that. We really want to get down to how is it really impacting students in our system, and we think we now have the tools available and the staff support to really do that now. Anything else?
Comments or questions? I have one. Kim, this is for you. What do you think is driving the numbers down in attendance for is it fear of
I think
the disease is being spread with younger 3 and 4 year olds, or is it something else?
I think Mr. Toronto, it's really twofold. When you think about public school, K-12, parents know that children should be in school during that time, and they come to us to enroll. The early childhood program has always needed to go out and recruit families and let them know about the opportunity, let them know about being enrolled. You don't have to be potty trained, things like that. And we have a very robust in-person recruitment process. And many times we are spending 1 to 2 days a week at Crusader Clinic talking to parents in waiting rooms. We are at the DHS office talking with parents. And that is an in-person contact where we can share that.
Yeah.
So that impacted us for sure. But I also do believe that just the fear of sending young children, I think parents are concerned about young children wearing masks. I have to tell you, our preschoolers are doing great with that, but I do believe that there is the whole fear of young children coming to school. They don't sit in desks, they play and interact, and I think that statewide that's what we're seeing, and I'm so thankful that we made the decision. I know it was kind of a last minute decision to offer remote learning, but when we look at, we have 612 kids enrolled in remote. That was the right decision to give parents that option. We are working with our community to continue to spread the word that program's available and that these are the safe measures that we're using. So we're hoping, we're still getting enrollment, but it's just not as high.
Understand. Other comments? Questions for Kim? Mr. Khan?
Do you see that the source of grants will be relatively similar for the coming year?
So if I'm understanding your question, you're asking if we're going to maintain our current level of funding.
Yes.
And I don't know the answer to that. As in any grant-funded year, we don't know what our grant award is until later in the spring, and I'm sure there are going to be things that will impact that. Just to clarify the comment that Jude made about our funding. So this year was the first year ever that the Illinois State Board of Ed allowed us to spend money that we had not spent last year. Usually we need to spend by the end of August. ISB decided to allow us to spend money because we obviously didn't use it in things like transportation and stuff to support this year, which allowed us to do the things that she mentioned, purchase iPads and things like that. They will advise us. As it stands right now, we've not been given any indication that we'll be able to roll over additional money, but that may come in the spring, especially depending on the funding cycle. So I don't know the answer to that, but we'll keep the board informed. The good news is, if we were under-enrolled, the state board could reduce our funding during the year. They said very early on that due to the COVID-19 that they would not be reducing district's funding during this school year.
Question? Okay. Thank you. Go ahead, Jude. You have some consent items?
We do. So Kim, thank you for the clarification too on being able to use last year's money all through this year. All right, we have consent agenda items for next week's December 8th meeting. The first of which is the West Middle School HVAC upgrades, architectural and engineering services, specifically for the replacement of the unit ventilators at West Middle School, as well as some interior finish improvements, which would include painting and flooring. So this is the recommendation will come with us to hire Larson and Darby for this work at a cost of $109,000 for their fees and $500 for reimbursable expenses. The next one is architectural services for internal finish improvements, and these are all captured in our previous facilities plan in terms of financing. And this one is for work to be done over the summer, and the Design and Construction Department recommends a contract with Larson and Darby for this work, and which would be $130,000 for fees, $700 reimbursable expenses. The schools that will be impacted by this are Beyer, Rolling Green, Ellis, Risa, Lincoln, and Summerdale. In addition to that, we have 2 bid recommendations. The first one is for window replacements at McIntosh, and that too was part of the 2012 facility master plan, and it includes placement of all the windows as well as the 3 exits. We also have a bid recommendation that's coming forward for specialized transportation. This is the bid to transport students with special needs, students attending early childhood classes, and for students that live outside our normal boundaries due to housing issues. The district received 2 bids for this. I think 8 attended. We expected to get, I think, 4 or 6, but we ended up with 2. And the lowest bidder was Sunrise in the amount of $9,047,670.77. This we budgeted for $6.5 million based on last year's cost for this item. So we're actually up like a third if we're looking at the 6.5 million, and now we're looking at 9,047,000. The nearest bid to that was from Safeway Transportation, and their base was $10,997,000, so it was almost $2 million more. All right, and then I'll finish out these consent agenda items. I didn't look at my time, but if we have further conversation, we can go back to any one of these. We are going to be seeing a systems monitoring and custom support software renewal. And since we have a large number of systems maintained by the school IT staff, we have to be able to act proactively to perceived or potential problems that could cause system outages. If a problem is not detected before it starts, the speed in which we're able to respond becomes paramount. Additionally, due to the pandemic and the ever-growing reliance on technology, we need to be able to support district staff, whether they're at home, a hotel, or a district building. In our efforts to provide availability to all district systems, 99% of the time, these are the products that we use that are extremely important. So we need to renew our systems monitoring and remote system management solutions to ensure the district's able to continue working toward goal of 99.99% system availability, and to ensure the correct technicians are receiving alerts to ensure swift response. The last contract or item that we'll be voting on is something called IXL Math, no red ink. And this is something that we already have in our schools. In January of 2020, we voted to provide this. The problem is there's an increased need and request for this. The building principals have put out their reasoning as to why they need additional licensures. The cost of this will be $9,745 for IXL Math, $2,709 for No Red Ink, and $666 for Learning A to Z. Principals will monitor the usage and work with staff for engagement with this program. And that's everything that we're going to be looking at on December 8th for a vote. Think, right? Yep. So if anybody has questions on any of those items, I'm sure we can have a couple minutes to have them answered. How are we doing on time, Ken? Well, six.
Fine. Yeah, you're good.
Okay.
Answer questions on any of those consent items. See none? Okay. Thank you, Jude.
Thank you.
To item number 5, which is the planning and development. Mr. Rollins, who chairs that committee, is going to give those reports.
So for once, I've got the short report.
Okay.
The only substantive item that we have to discuss is this memorandum of understanding. And the memorandum of understanding is actually with Winnebago County. And this is actually a little bit of good news. I wish it would have come a little earlier. Yeah. The federal government made available to the states and various other institutions like something like 150 million rapid antigen tests for COVID. And 100 million of those were allocated to the states, and they apparently started shipping them in mid-September. But they're finally just trickling down to us. And Winnebago County has been given its allotment, and we would be giving the tests, we would be administering the tests, but we would have to do it under the Winnebago County Health Department's Institutional Clinical Laboratory Improvement Act license. So what the MOU does is set us up to be able to basically be an extension to the county's CLIA license. That's really the first step. What still has to be worked out are a lot of other considerations, such as the location and number of testing sites, the number of staff to be trained to give the tests, the impact on nursing coverage at schools, if we have our nurses give the tests, projected test demand, necessary biohazard equipment, legal liabilities, including consent and lab waivers, and daily reporting to the Winnebago County Health Department. That's all the stuff that still has to be worked out. This is just the first step. This is the MOU with Winnebago County that would allow us to do it. So my understanding is, the potential advantage of this, or where this is potentially going to help us, is really on staffing, from the standpoint that right now if somebody's showing symptoms, they have to get out of the building, and then they can't come back and work until they've gotten a test and that showed a negative test result. So this would be potentially a game changer there, where somebody just had a cold or allergies or something else that was, demonstrating symptoms. They could go get a rapid test and they'd be cleared to come back to work almost immediately. It's I asked the question. It's the accuracy is supposed to be up in the mid 90% or high 90%. So, like I said, this could potentially help us out on the staffing side. And I don't know how much of this also will be available for students. That all has to be worked out. Does anybody have any questions? Because we have Ms. Turnipseed and Mr. Deal here to answer questions.
The other, just comment, I believe there's no cost to us
for
the
free.
test.
Yep. These were free from the federal government to the states, and the states have been allocating them down to the counties.
Other than we have to, our cost of administering and staff time and that kind of stuff, yeah. Okay. Heck of a good idea.
Okay, then moving on, the only other thing I've got is one consent item, which is the e-learning plan. And I do believe, I guess it's not really attached here. All we've got it attached is the agenda. So The district has developed an e-learning plan for use immediately upon approval, allowing the continuity of learning for all students on an emergency day. Are there questions or discussion on this consent item? The actual plan, I think, was attached previously when we were actually just doing the notice of the hearing. But does anybody have any questions on the e-learning plan?
This is basically the snow day plan.
This is the snow day plan. Yep. This is the no more snow day plan.
All right, okay.
So Tim, this is Jude, and so the e-learning, I learned something working on this committee, and I don't know that the other board members know it, and so if you do, we're way ahead of me. But when we have items for the committee of the whole that are going to be placed on our consent agenda, quite often we don't have attachments on the committee of the whole. But what I was taught was that if you change over on board docs to the main governing board, and you go to and click on meetings, and it gives you, it allows you to go to draft. And you can go to the draft agenda for December 8th, for example, and you could pull up the draft agenda, and it does have the corresponding attachments. For example, the Sunrise, the transportation contract that you didn't have on your agenda for committee of the whole is on there, and so are the other any other attachments that might not have been on committee of the whole. So it's been really helpful to me, and so I was just trying to pull it up and see if Tim's was on there, and this is e-learning. And the answer is yes, there is an attachment on their Rockford Public Schools District e-learning plan. So for anybody going forward, if you want to give that a try, if you don't see something on there and you want more information before we meet, does that help anybody? I hope so. I didn't mean to take your time if it didn't.
You know, Jude, I knew that, but I forgot it. So I'm glad you brought it up. It's a good reminder.
That's it for me.
Okay, we move on then to item number 6, which is the remainder of the internal external stakeholders presentation committee report. Mr. Siegel.
Thank you. And for the record, Jude, I knew about that whole meeting draft agenda thing. I'm way ahead of you for a long time.
Because you're always ahead of me, but you know, that's okay. I'm glad to bring up the rear.
The first item is the property transfer to the Northern Illinois Land Bank. As part of the 2012 Facilities Master Plan, the district demolished 9 buildings. 5 of the sites were transferred through intergovernmental agreements. 4 to the Rockford Park District. There were New Milford, Thompson, Walker, and White Swan. And 1 we gave to the village of Cherry Valley. That was Cherry Valley Elementary School. The Kishwaukee Elementary site has become part of the Constance Lane campus. Dennis, King, and Nelson demolitions were completed in the spring of 2020. The district has an opportunity to transfer these properties to the Northern Illinois Land Bank, and the purpose of the Northern Illinois Land Bank is to combat community deterioration and blight by returning land to productive use. The process aids the city of Rockford and Winnebago County by permitting otherwise untaxed and unused properties in blighted areas of Rockford to be used in a productive fashion. The terms of the donation agreement include: the district will be responsible for completing 3 separate Phase 1 environmental audits for each property at a cost of $2,000 per property. And for a period of up to 2 years after the closing date, the district is responsible for paying $4,500 per year for liability insurance and mowing of the property. Are there any questions about this item?
Can we ask, maybe not just about this item, but we have other property that, so if we empty Page Park this year, because the transition programs moves out, and we have Styles still, do we, that we don't have our own programs in? I would just ask if does that just wait until the next facilities task force comes forward, or does the district have plans for other buildings that we're not using for educating our students starting next year?
Mr. Phillips is here if he wants to answer that question.
So at this time, Ms. McCulloch, you're correct. Page Park, if we are able to move the transitions program out of there, would end up being vacant. At this time, there are no plans. There have been discussions that that property would be abated and then demolished as we have other sites. But at this time, there's no dollars budget allocated for that. Styles is another location that has been under consideration in the past. We do have a program currently out there. It's not a district run program, but that would be another opportunity for us if that program was transitioned out to abate and demolish that property.
For a piece of property to go into the land bank, which would be one that, for example, the Park District didn't want, or a community like Cherry Valley, they are only interested in land. Is that correct? So if we indeed vacate those premises, we would have to still demolish whatever structures are on them. Is that correct?
I think in this case, I would have to reach out to the land bank authority to verify that. I believe that they really don't have the budget to purchase properties or demolish. So they've really looked at taking on smaller properties with homes that they could transition to somebody, a developer, to potentially renovate that space and then sell it to bring it back onto the tax roll. I would really have to reach out to them to see if they would be interested in the large facilities like an elementary school.
Okay, well, and I just asked the question because obviously budgeting, if you have to do a demolition, is way different than being able to go through the land bank and not having to demolish. So, although Page Park is in such bad shape, and that's why we're getting everyone out, right? So nobody'd want it.
Correct. It is not in very good shape.
Okay, Mr. Siegel.
Thank you. The next item will be a MOU with Rockford Promise. Our legal department is preparing a memorandum of understanding to follow up this week's exciting news. The City of Rockford plans to commit $1.5 million a year to fund scholarships for qualified graduates of Rockford Public Schools to attend Northern Illinois University. The responsibilities laid out in this MOU for the school district are as follows, and there are four. They pertain to counselors. RPS 205 will make best efforts to increase counseling hours for all students and preparing students for the Rockford Promise NIU Scholarship. Teachers, RPS 205 agrees to work towards having all high school teachers obtain a master's degree in the core content area, including but not limited to English, math, social science, or science by 2025. This one is particularly interesting to me, and I think is a huge benefit to the entire district. Even those students who are not going to go to NIU benefit because of the investments that the school district is going to make in preparing staff to prepare the students who are going to go to NIU. I think that's a huge, huge benefit. In collaboration with NIU and Rockford Promise, RPS 205 will participate in pre-enrollment events, meetings, and information sessions with prospective Rockford Promise scholars. And then early college credit opportunities. RPS 205 commits to expanding early college credit opportunities, including advanced placement courses and dual credit opportunities to students by 2025. Again, this is another element of this agreement that has been reached with some really, really hard-working entities that are going to benefit all students and benefit the community in its entirety. I think this is a very exciting agreement. Any questions or comments on this item? Seeing none. Both the land bank transfer and the MOU with Rockford Promise will be on next week's agenda. They are not presently marked as action items, but you can expect that they will be by then. Moving on to a report. And I expect this will likely be my last item, because I had a lot of my time chewed up at the beginning. And that's a report on the district's work with the National Equity Project. We've had a partnership with National Equity Project for a few years that, from the board's involvement, has been fairly quiet. As of late, we have expanded our participation and engagement with National Equity Project. I have been a part of this engagement. I've attended several fairly lengthy and endlessly fascinating meetings. And as far as how this work is going to affect the board, I had a really interesting meeting today with what's called the Role Affinity Group. So I met with people from National Equity Project and other board members from school districts around Northern Illinois, where we had to discuss how it is that a part of a school district that is so accustomed to top-down organization, governing by nudging things, making very slow, small, incremental changes, how they're going to engage in work that demands to be bottom-up. We discussed the fact that we are an organization that has consistently struggled to close the achievement gap. It's been particularly difficult for our African American students, and we really need to place our focus there and have our conversation begin there. The conversation must include everybody, but we must target those who are farthest away, and pull them up. And as we do, everybody will rise. But we had a really difficult conversation about how does the board engage in that work, because it was determined that the board has to be present and they have to hear and listen to the voices of students. We're all accustomed to looking at organizational charts. You know, we get one every time there's some change and we have to see who's slotted where. This work is going to look very, very different, and we are not only going to have to be able to listen to students, and I'm going to kind of give you the why if you don't already know in a minute, but we're not only going to have to listen to them, but we're going to have to be responsible for deliberating on what they have told us, overseeing action that going to have deadlines. And we have to be aware of the work that is being done throughout the organization and use our roles as board members to monitor and keep up with it and ensure that it's continuing. One of the questions that came up during the meeting is, why does the board have to listen to students? And it was determined that that's been the one constant in our school district in particular, is we have a significant portion of our students who we are not getting them past that achievement gap. Year after year after year after year, we don't have a staff that matches their a particular demographic. We don't have a history that says we can credibly come up with the answers on our own. What we do have is a constant presence of people that we need to serve better. And if we're going to change something about how we try to serve them, it has to be we listen to them. So trying to figure out just exactly how the board is going to engage with our students is going to be the work of the board. Mr. Earl Dotson Jr. has scheduled a session where we will listen, and politely invited me to listen to students. There will be teachers, building and central administrators there as well. And there the work is really going to begin of listening. That'll be on December 15th. I imagine a report from the internal, external stakeholders and communications committee will be coming, forthwith. I'd like to give this opportunity now to Matt Zediger, who's going to talk about the HR element of the work with National Equity Project.
Thank you, Mr. Siegel. I would like to kind of demonstrate how we've transitioned with our equity work. As the board knows, we started this work several years ago, and upon leading that work and diving into some schools and what we thought was our original plan, we realized that the capacity building wasn't at the district. It wasn't getting out to our teachers. It wasn't getting out to our principals. And Mr. Siegel alluded to some of the changes that we as a cabinet and Dr. Jarrett led in how we needed to incorporate equity into our systems and to what we do already. And we brought back a renewal, a one-year renewal with the National Equity Project earlier this year that the board approved. And reviewing what our original plan was, we realized that with the complexity of this work and how grand that it is, we really needed to focus on some shorter term processes and projects in areas that we can really monitor and focus on. And so as we looked at equity in general, we really have transitioned into really three main areas this year that we're going to focus on. One of those is principal development. Other one is listening systems. And then the third one is working with Freshmen on Track in conjunction with our AROI work. And so as we hit each one of these focus areas, other cabinet members and Dr. Jarrett will actually be updating you as that is a main component of their work. And I think that's a great example of how this equity work has gone from 6 original design members to try to impact 4,500 employees, 28,000 students, to now seeing it dispersed amongst different groups and different work going on. But before we turn it over into each one of those areas, I think just to build upon what Mr. Siegel said is, one big change that we realized that we needed was to really develop what we have an equity systems team. It's a district-wide team that has representation from across departments. Mr. Siegel is on it as a board member. We have our union leadership as part of that. We have student representation on the group. And so we feel like we have community members, parents. So we really feel like we've built a robust kind of umbrella committee to take in the information that these different areas are going to bring back to us, to then look at how do we make changes, whether that's policy, whether it's process. What is that information that each one of these groups is bringing back to us? How do we digest that, analyze that? How does that impact and change what we do? And so we thought with the update here, we'd like to update the board on the different focuses that we have this year. And so I'd like to start and turn it over to Dr. Vosberg to give a little update on the principal development that's going around in terms of our equity work. Dr. Vosberg?
Thank you, Mr. Guzedeker. As you mentioned, the principals are involved in the work this year, and they have been involved in the past, but we've ramped up our efforts. We've incorporated training once a month, working with our partners from NEP, and the principals have really 2 assignments this year that will be navigated through the training. Assignment 1 is to build an equity team in their building. Looking for a group of teacher leaders that are ready to have conversations about equity and support for students. And then by the end of the year, looking at their data, student achievement data, attendance data, participation data, discipline data, identify an equity challenge to start solving for next school year. So that's a real quick summary of real important work that we actually began in August. Again, many of the principals have had multiple years of training, and now we're in the application level of that training.
The next area is the listening systems. Mr. Siegel alluded to Mr. Dotson Jr. in terms of setting up an affinity group with students. There are more systems being built and processes being built. So Mr. Dotson Jr. and Dr. Jarrett, I think both have something that they can add to this piece of the equity work. Mr. Dotson Jr.
Good evening. Thank you for the Mr. Dotson. Appreciate that. So my efforts I'm spearheading, as Mr. Siegel alluded to, is the spearheading the listening groups for students, particularly African American students. I just have to tell you on a personal note, I'm super excited about this work. Obviously, this is the opportunity to just work with students. I think, and I just want to be clear, it's this is not a monolithic group, right? These are just not students who are struggling in our system, but students who are also doing well, right? So we want a wide range, a wide spectrum of perspectives, and I think Mr. Siegel alluded to is that we want to listen to the students. And so we do have a meeting set up. The principals, all the high school principals have been fantastic to work with. All 5 of them have recommended students that they think should be a part of this group, and would give us the great feedback that we're looking for. And then we're going to pivot, right? So it's just we're working with high school students first. Next, we'll jump into talking to some middle school students, and then I think we had talked about maybe some upper elementary students as well. And then our work will also then shift to African American staff as well. So we're creating these different listening systems, but as Mr. Siegel said, we want to start with the students. And I think as you talked about, I think when we look at whether it's some of those other metrics, whether it's graduation rates, freshmen on track, et cetera, we all have our assumptions about why things are the way they are, right? And we all have our kind of biases about what we think the problem is. So it'll be interesting and exciting to really get some good informal, good qualitative data to kind of support some of the things that we think might be the problem, but really looking forward and excited about listening to what our students have to say. Thank you.
Dr. Jarrett, anything to add to any other listening protocols that you have and are participating in?
No, I think it was covered. Thank you.
Then the last one, as we were looking at focus with our students and our assistant principals and our teachers, we had decided to really take a look at something that was currently being studied, and that was our freshman academy with our freshmen on track through our Tier 3 academic return on investment. And so Mrs. Detman is going to give us an update on how that work is combining and how we're using student voice within that work.
So the third leg of this here is kind of a marriage of priorities, as Mr. Zedeker pointed out, which is pairing our academic return on investment study with kind of the design lab where all three of these strands are coming together. So leadership development, listening to student voice, and then of course having the opportunity to study outcomes for freshman students. So what we've got here is a focus on the Freshman Academy principals themselves. And what's happening is the National Equity Project partners are meeting with them once a month for 3 hours and doing a deep dive into their capacity to lead change through the lens of equity. And so by pairing that with our academic return on investment work, we're not only clarifying our outcomes and measuring our progress along the way in a very, I guess, organized and deliberate manner, but we're also then building up the leadership capacity of the freshman assistant principals and helping them understand not only how to capture student voice, but how to use that in order to drive change and to support some challenging conversations with teachers and help teachers see their work through the eyes of their students, which is so critical. So we have, the study and then the design lab, and we selected Freshman on Track, A, because of the critical nature of the freshman year, and B, because it's the perfect size, and we had a group of already engaged assistant principals. We have 5 assistant principals. They're fantastic, they're passionate leaders, and I think they're really going to grow during this time. So we're thankful for the opportunity to pull those 2 priorities together.
Thank you, Mrs. Detman. With that, any follow-up questions that we might have from the board?
I guess I'd just make a comment. Oh, Ms. Stanford, you go first.
Thank you. I just want to say that the whole topic that we're talking about is very exciting to me. I'm so excited that we're doing this, that things are moving in the direction that they are. It's something that's near and dear to my heart, and I would like to offer my services if there's any way I can be involved or to help or whatever means. I would love to do that.
Thank you.
My comment is, I'm all for hearing the voice of the students. I think that's something that we as board members have not had that opportunity to hear the voice of the students. We mostly hear the voices of the adults that work for the district or whatever. So I think it will be a challenge because we are not a diverse board. I think that will be a challenge for us. So hopefully we can learn how to listen. Earl, you want to comment on that? Okay.
Certainly, it can send you the invitation if you're able to make it. Again, just one last part of that process. Again, the idea is we have Kathy Bear and Mary Call are going to be there to take down copious notes, to really listen to what the students say and record it. The idea is we're going to have a series of meetings. We're going to kind of talk back, tell the students, here's what we think we've heard. And then the idea, to Mr. Siegel's point again, is bring that information and report back to the board, because that's what we're telling the students is we need you to partner with us, right, administration and the board, to help us as we make policies, as we do this work. We want your voice to be able to partner with us. So we're looking forward to bring all that information back and to see, is there something there that we can do with the board level and policy level to advance this work. So I'm certainly seeing that.
Go ahead.
I also, on my list, is to give an update on the Listening Bureau and McGuire Woods. There has not been any update on the Listening Bureau, or Speaking Bureau, listening. And I've had just a tiny incremental increase in information from McGuire Woods since the last meeting. Given the dwindling time, I'm going to save that for the next committee of the whole meeting. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments or questions for Mr. Siegel? All right, I will go ahead then and present the governance committee update. The board policy 2.10 is being revised to specifically prohibit board members from participation in the selection, award, or administration of a contract supported by a federal award if the board member has a real or apparent conflict of interest. So the language will better align with that. Board policy 2.110 talks about qualifications and terms and duties of board officers. And this is being revised as a result of new legislation which requires boards and elected officials to provide a mechanism for reporting and independently reviewing allegations of sexual harassments made against an elected official by another elected official. So that wording has been added. Board policy 3.40 is just a wording change in the ISBE's credentialing agency for superintendents, and to be updated to the new name, which is called the Illinois State Educator Preparation and Licensure Board. Board policy 5.130 is being updated. General personnel is being updated as a result of a finding issued by a state grant auditor. The auditor wanted the board to have a policy informing individuals that the district will comply with the HIPAA rules to the extent that the statute applies to school districts. So, any questions or comments on these will be referred to our legal department. Okay. Mr. Rollins.
So I'd like to go back to 2.100.
Okay.
So you described the change, but you described one of the changes, but there's actually a larger change, which I don't understand. So they've changed the first paragraph to prohibit solicitation or accepting gratuities, favors, or anything of monetary value from contractors. Potential contractors are parties to agreements or contracts with the district. My point is, we have a very, very, very detailed and specific policy on that topic at Board Policy 2.105, which is drafted to comply with the law, and which is very specific. This is very general and causes me some concerns. So I'd like to know why we're making this change, since this topic is already covered under a different policy, which was written to comply with the law.
Okay. Generally, the proposed revisions we make are in accord with the statutes. We're mirroring the changes in statutes. For some instances, we are using the proposed language from the Illinois Association of School Boards to keep our policies all compatible with one another. So in this instance, this is language proposed by the IASB, and I guess if you find it objectionable, it's open for discussion, and we can revise it if need be.
I have concerns about it. So, you know, the way this is written, solicit or accept gratuities, favors, or anything of monetary value, there's all kinds of exceptions in 2.105, which are not built into that sentence. And I really, just as a general rule, I mean, this is the way I try to approach contract drafting. I don't like covering the same topic in two different places because you end up saying things that are inconsistent. So I would like you to take a look at that. Look at policy 2.05 and tell me what this is supposed to do that isn't already accomplished in 2.05.
I'll get back to you.
Okay. Good point. Any other comments or questions? All right, the next item for discussion now is the onboarding of new board members, and how appropriate is that? Okay, because we're going to have a brand new board member as of next week. So I just wanted to give everyone the opportunity. Mrs. Hoadley had sent me the 50-page onboarding packet, and let me highlight some of the things that I would want to make some suggestions for improving that and adding to it. We need to add for the mandatory training for new board members the abuse and neglect mandated reporter training onto that list. These two recommendations came from Mrs. McCulloch, which I think are excellent ones. One, we should add training on how to review a student disciplinary packet. We all know that how helpful that would be when we become new board members. So I think that's a great suggestion. And another suggestion she had is have Mrs. Fromm train new board members on the ways to best use board docs and how to get the information out of board docs, which I think would be also very helpful for new board members, maybe some old board members too, you know. So there are a couple other changes on, and I'll just let you know what some of them are pretty minor. But on page number 4, there's a discussion about electing board officers at every election, and actually our board elects officers annually, so I want to change that. I want to add legal counsel to someone that the board employs. There is little discussion in this thing about the important role the board has in governance. And we've all been trained by Mr. Eady about the importance of the board's role in governance. So I kind of want to add some discussion in there about governing and planning. And there's a word I want to add for facilities on page 4 that just says safe and adequate. Just says adequate facilities. I want to add the word safe. I had a question on number 5, and I don't know if legal can help answer this question, but there's a section on there that states that we require a moment of silence to recognize veterans on any school activities happening on November 11th. And I don't know is that a policy we have now? If it is, I wasn't aware of that. I don't think it's a bad idea, but I just wasn't aware that we had a policy that if a school is having an event on Veterans Day, that we have a moment of silence.
Right, that is part of the state law. So typically we don't have school or activities on that holiday. So but it does allow a waiver for certain holidays. And so in the event you do, that would be correct.
There's a couple of minor little typos on page 7 and 8. Also on page 11, I want to add some discussion about the role that the board has in governance and decision-making role. And I think many of the things in this packet probably come from the Illinois School Board Association because it looks like their wordage. But I mean, they decide that our most important function is policy making, and I think we've kind of learned that we have a much more important role. I mean, not that that's not important, but we have more of an important role in governance of the school district and decision making. So, and then the last thing on page 13, it talks about the doing a 5-year strategic plan, and we've kind of had that discussion in our high impact training with Mr. Eady that 5-year plans are really not as popular as they used to be, and really maybe we should change that to say a shorter time frame of maybe 2 to 5 years or something like that. Mr. Rollins, do you have some suggestions or for changes or improvements?
Yeah, so on page 17 it says we generally meet twice a month.
Okay.
Or 2 times a month when we're actually meeting 3 times a month.
All right, change the 3 times a month.
And then just to confirm your suspicion, I noticed that the last bullet point on page 19 says that board members should attend conferences and training classes provided by IASB to learn as much as possible.
Okay.
So I wonder if we could just take out the reference to IASB.
Helpful and beneficial conferences, not necessarily theirs. All right.
Ken?
Yes, go ahead, Jude.
So, again, I think some of the things that help a new board member are really understanding how to navigate our information. And in addition to the pieces, or the piece I pulled up about discipline, because I think those discipline packets can be lengthy, and understanding, how you can get to the meat of what you need to get to, and the difference between, the IEA packet versus the expulsionary packet. And I don't know if there's an opportunity for comment or by legal to understand what you can and cannot do, or what happens, for example, if we don't approve an IEA. But understanding all the agenda items struck me. Why are some things under consent and some things under new, and what's an action item? And when you look at an agenda item, how important the executive summary is, and where to look on there for what you need to find. So I think navigating the agenda in general is important. And I think that in addition to adding on that we have a third meeting of the month, to understand what that third meeting of the month is about, as compared to being just another board meeting. The fact that we don't vote on anything, the fact that the how things are divided by committee, and presentation made by committee chairs, and things that move forward and how they move forward on the following agenda. So again, these big picture things about how to be a good board member, how to talk to the community, how to do this or that. I mean, boots on the ground, you want to be able to be a participant in a meeting, feeling like you have a sense of, or an understanding of what's going on and where to go, and how to read things. So to me, that should be the really important part of just that initial onboarding, and making sure that we have help for new board members.
I was thinking, about this particularly today, because I spoke with Denise today, and I was thinking that, we kind of have a guide that we've been using since I've been on the board, that, there are certain things that I, as the board president, cover in an orientation with new board members. Then there's a and a list of items the superintendent covers. There's a list of items that the legal department covers with new board members, and there's many things that Mrs. Fromm has to take care of with the new board members, of getting them an email address, getting their ID and access to the building, all that kind of stuff. But I think that all board members, and usually I think this is a good idea to have one of the experienced board members be a resource to the new person, so that they can kind of help mentor them along, and that they could go to that board member and ask any silly question they ever had, whatever, and be a mentor for them. So I'd like to include that on that list as well. And so I may be reaching out to one of you soon on that one. So we all have a role in helping a new board member begin to feel like part of the team, and knowledgeable of what their responsibilities are and their preparation is, whatever. So any other ideas or suggestions on anything related to that? Okay, the preview of consent items for me on December 8th will be meeting minutes, contract purchase orders. There may be a workers' compensation case, superintendent's contract, and the Freedom of Information law. So pretty mostly routine stuff, except for the superintendent contract. So that's it for me. I don't believe we have any public speakers for tonight. So if there are no further comments or agenda recommendations by the board, I'll take a motion.
So Ken. So last month, or whenever it was, I asked if we could have that conversation about the sales tax. And so we had a very informative report by Ann. And sometimes we bring things forward and we learn about them, and then it just kind of goes away without a full conversation. And I would expect this has to be a public conversation by what all board members might be thinking in terms of what we do, because at some point we're going to have to make a decision. And I think sooner is better than later.
Yes.
And so I would like to know when you feel that would be next best put on our agenda to continue that conversation.
Suggestions? I mean, I agree. I think we need to have a discussion on it, and I think we need to decide whether or not we want to move forward, and because it is going to take a lot of work, a lot of prep time, and some, as Rollins has said, bandwidth for administration. So I know that Dr. Jarrett had agreed to poll the Winnebago County Public School superintendents to see what their appetite was for that, and thought that would be easy for him to do. So go ahead, Mr. Rollins.
I was just going to suggest, so I think he is going to do that, so let's just get through the holidays, and maybe we should do it sometime after the first of the year, maybe in February or March.
All right.
Well, and my point was that we do our agendas. In fact, I'm looking at the January agenda right now. With this whole new governance model, we're trying to do agendas a month ahead of time. And so that's why I'm asking now. I did not expect anything before the end of the year.
Okay.
But if we get it on there, then we'll know what's coming forward, and people have timelines for any information that they're bringing us to help us have those conversations. Thank you.
All right. Well, Mrs. Hoadley is the one who helps us the most with putting those advance agendas together, so I'm going to ask her to put that on your list of items that we want to talk about, the county sales tax proposal.
Let's go for February.
Yeah, okay, so early February, let's try that. So, yes. Okay, go ahead, go right ahead. She has an answer on the policy.
Okay, so you had a question on the conflict of interest policy. I went to the federal regulations cited at the bottom of the policy, and it specifically says that the district must have written standards covering conflicts of interest, and the language that you questioned is right there in the reg. So true to form, the IASB pulled that language directly from the federal regulation governing conflicts. And
You're talking about the solicitor accept gratuities, favors, or anything of monetary value from contractors?
yes, it's under their reg.
Why would that not be covered in 2105?
Because it's under the policy covering conflicts of interest, and that's what this policy 2.100 is, our board member conflict of interest policy, as opposed to our ethics and gift management policy.
Hoadley, you have a comment?
I do. I think we have a way to resolve this. The language that is included in this particular policy is really only applicable in very limited situations, such as when you build the health center at Auburn. So we can specify, make it really more specific, and move it over to the ethics portion so that it falls within the same policy.
Okay, thanks.
So I think there's a way we can easily address your
That makes
concerns.
sense. Yeah, I agree. It could be confusing if it's covered in two different policies in different words. You know?
Yes, I understand, but I believe they did it because that federal reg specifically said governing conflicts of interest as opposed to ethics. So I think it's how it ended up there, but I agree that we can.
You want her to send you a copy of that?
Oh, the reg?
Yeah.
Well, I can pull it up.
All right, okay. All right, so any other agenda items for tonight? If not, I'll take a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Siegel. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. We are adjourned at 7:41. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.